Hello, this is Zeblo filling in for HousingWire President Diego Sanchez. Today, we're sitting down with Kristin Messerli to discuss the 2025 NextGen Homebuyers Report. Kristin is a strategist and speaker on millennial and Gen Z housing trends, dedicated to fostering financial literacy and homeownership among young adults. FirstHome IQ is a nonprofit with a mission to deliver homeownership education. Kristin, thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so we've got a lot to talk about today. But before we dive into the specifics of the 2025 report, can you share with the audience the origins of the report, how many years you've been doing it, and I guess most importantly, why? Why did all this come about?
Yeah, so I've been doing research with millennials and now Gen Z for probably over 10 years, maybe 12 or 13 years. And then about 5 years ago, I started putting together reports in sponsorship in partnership with National MI. And that was kind of a way to formalize this, create some real public thought leadership around the topic of how to improve access to the millennial market, and now that's expanded into Gen Z. But yeah, the idea was really how do we better understand younger consumers and homebuyers in a way that goes beyond just identifying that which a big topic of this report was around down payment myths and things like that. But beyond just knowledge, like what are they actually experiencing? And so I've been publishing these reports at least annually, and now it's been semi-annually since 2020. And yeah, this year's report this last financial literacy edition is my favorite one that we've ever done. So I'm really excited to talk to you about it today.
Excellent. Just out of curiosity, has it gotten progressively easier for you from a process standpoint?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, so we've surveyed over 8,000 millennial and Gen Z consumers through these reports. And now I know exactly, like I have, a process document that I follow exactly to, here's survey collection process, what that looks like. Here's the design process, what that looks like. And this report was the first time I was actually able to utilize AI in the data analysis portion. I still did it myself as well, but I was being able to check things and cross-reference things in a way that I wasn't able to in previous reports. I attempted in previous reports and it was hallucinating a bunch. And so it was kind of fun now to be able to spend a little bit more time looking at things differently, whereas before I had to spend so much time on the actual data analysis portion.
Right. Okay. So the title of the report, Next Gen, right? So who are we talking about when you say Next Gen? Because in the report, there are a few generations that are discussed. And can you kind of lay out those age ranges as well? Because I know some people, there's some overlap or people kind of have a little skewed or definitions or age ranges whenever they're attaching those to like millennials and Gen Z, et cetera.
Yeah. So we're looking at Gen Z, younger millennials, and older millennials. But the actual age range that we're using is between 18 and 44. That's just kind of like how if you look at the way that behaviors have changed, I think it collects those in a great three-part grouping. But yeah, we're looking at, and Gen Z goes a little bit younger than that, but we start at 18 since that's kind of when they are entering adulthood. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the report focuses, quite a bit on financial literacy. So from your perspective, what's the single biggest disconnect between how confident next generation homebuyers feel about their financial literacy and how prepared they actually are to take on a home or a mortgage?
So it's interesting. I mean, one of the biggest knowledge gaps is around down payment, which is probably not surprising to anybody. But what was surprising to me was that actually 92% of people said that they did not answer the question correctly around what the minimum down payment requirements were. And half thought, you need to put 20%. There was some confusion between the questions around that. So that was surprising to me. But I think, there's definitely a gap in confidence levels as well. One thing that I found interesting in this report was that we saw confidence levels, high confidence definitely didn't correlate with high test scores. So a like little bit lower on the confidence level, and not super low, but kind of in the middle on confidence, and kind of in the middle around skepticism and distrust is where we saw a sweet spot of highest test scores. So you want a little bit of skepticism, but not too much, and not zero,
Right. The down payment thing is funny. I was just listening this morning. I was working out. There was an interview. People assumed he was a comedian for a while. His name is Andrew Callahan, I believe. He's the all gas, no brakes guy who did this investigative journalism, but they kind of seem like mockumentaries. And he's the reporter over the past couple of months, the Hunter Biden interviews that were like 2 hours long, where Hunter Biden waxes about like drugs, poetic, that guy. But he's an actual journalist. He was interviewing Pete Buttigieg and kind of grilling Buttigieg on the economy and the market and politics, et cetera, et cetera. And he told Pete Buttigieg, I'm a pretty successful guy. And he lives in California, I would assume. He's like, I'm still struggling. The down payment on a house is 10%, and I'm still struggling to save up to that. I'm like, man, you're a journalist. You're a well-informed young man. It is not 10%. It's just, it blew my mind that someone so plugged in to just adulthood. He's younger, but he's an adult and he's smart. He's, that myth would still persist.
Yeah, we do not see that change very much by education level or income level in terms of where not enough to be statistically significant when you look at what people think you need for a down payment. So it's, it's really interesting. And when I think about my friends as well, they often are successful and just have that in their mind, usually 20% even, that they need to save for a down payment. And so it's just kind of something that has really persisted through the years, despite, I think, a lot of work through the industry to, demystify that.
Right. I have some questions about, kind of addressing those gaps. I want to, beyond the down payment, there were knowledge gaps in, credit, budgeting, mortgage terminology, which could tie into, I guess, the down payment issue. Of these gaps, which one do you believe has the most immediate impact on home ownership readiness, and why?
I mean, it goes back to down payment. I do think that there's so many people that probably would be ready to buy if they understood that down payment, that it was accessible to them, and so I think that one, credit is a huge area as well. I would say that's like the next one that I want to go to in terms of where we're solutioning around this. But I also think we moved beyond just knowledge gaps specifically and looked at information access. And I think that looking at the amount of overwhelm that people have is also impacting their ability to move forward or address those knowledge gaps. And I think we all feel this way, where there's just so much information available. And we saw that in looking at how people are turning to TikTok and AI and influencers and all of that for information. There's so many different places to go. But that results in overload. And people, like over half of our respondents said that they felt overwhelmed by financial information. And what that leads to is a shutdown and a delay in decisions. And so, and another stat from the report is that we saw over half also said that they were delaying major financial decisions due to financial complexity and overwhelm. So it's, I think that's a big barrier in addition to just looking at specific knowledge gaps. It's like, okay, yeah, we have these knowledge gaps, but then how do we actually deliver that information? Because we've been giving information out there, but how do we deliver it in a way that doesn't result in that overwhelm?
Right. And that actually leads into the next thing I wanted to talk to you about, because I think that challenges the assumption, because, the younger generation, they're seen as digital natives, right? And so just because of that, they should be more informed. And you're saying that this information overload kind of shuts that down. So what should lenders and real estate agents, how should they begin to rethink their educational outreach?
Yeah, so I think in a world, like one of the data points that we collected was measuring how often people are using AI for gathering home buying information. And in January, that number was around 35%, I want to say. And in August, that jumped up into the 60% range. And so we know people they have unlimited access to information. And I think that the loan officer or the lender's role is no longer the person holding all the information. Like that part has been outpaced, in a lot of ways. But I think what they can do is lean into the relationship aspect. And that's where, in a world of AI and overwhelm and, unlimited access to information, that's where you can really compete. And so I'm encouraging loan officers to lean into empathy building, relationship building. That's empathy is what is going to equate to conversion and help people actually start moving when they are shut down from that overwhelm. So I know there's a lot to what does that mean? But I think that can mean in spending more time, use AI, whatever, for automation and all of that, but spend more time with your borrowers, spend more time partnering with other influencers, whether that be community leaders or online influencers, but building trust, being out there, sharing information, but in a way that is relational.
The misconceptions, the down payment one is the one we keep going back to. It almost turns and so has like a mythical quality to it, right? And so I know this isn't necessarily discussed in the report, and this could be purely anecdotal, just your opinion, but what do you think keeps these myths alive amidst the sea of information that speaks to the contrary? What do you think is keeping these myths persistent and almost like at a cultural level, right?
Yeah. That's a great question. So I think some of it is passed down. I mean, I think that it used to be 20%. And so that's what has been held on. But you're right. Like, why does it stay there? And I think one big answer to that is that financial information in general is pretty hard to get people to understand or even learn about. And so I don't think it's limited to the down payment question. I think it's across the board when you look at finances and anything in that realm. People do kind of shut down around it. And it's money is a very taboo topic. It's also can feel very invasive and like you're making a mistake. Everyone's nervous they're going to make a wrong move. And so to me, that's where we get into more of the psychology of money and the psychology of, how people are like, what fears are coming up for them and what are they leaning into, which is going to be something that's pretty ingrained in them. But yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
I feel like it takes on a quality, not to get, because these stories get blue, but I remember from my childhood, I mean, I grew up kind of pre-internet in Southeast Texas and hearing stories like the scandalous stories about celebrities that are just ridiculous or something. I remember hearing a story about Tom Cruise or maybe it was Madonna getting like a board implanted in their stomach to get it, keep it flat. And I lived in Seattle for a while and one of the guys that I was living with, I forget how it came up, but like that he heard that story too, and we didn't have the internet. It was just these stories that just get adopted into culture and they spread like this mythic quality and it's ethereal. You can't quite put a finger on where it actually comes from, but it spreads and it's persistent nonetheless. And I think this is a major reach here, but if you look at the way that, just using the celebrity stories as an example, how important the celebrity is to America and American culture, homeownership is that. Like homeownership is central to the American dream. So it makes sense that what is central to the American dream is going to have strong myths that sprout from it, right? And to change the mythology that is central to the American experience, whether it's for good or bad, right, is a very difficult thing to do because they take on a life of their own. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's very true. And I also think that the misinformation continues to spread all over, and we have increasing, one thing we saw in the report was that 72% of, or was it 72? I think 71% of Gen Z turned to trust influencers for financial information and home buying information. And so that's, or they're going to, or maybe it's 41%, 71% go to TikTok. Anyway, it's a big amount of like people that are talking about this. They're not just going to their loan officer or their local bank or, to their parents. They're going to so many people that are all sharing that same belief that you're talking about, that has been ingrained in them. So this is going to perpetuate itself,
Right. So we're kind of circling around these same topics, but because there's so much to explore, the aspect of financial literacy not just part of a personal responsibility, but also the access to for home buyers, the access to trusted, clear, succinct information. What do you feel the role that realtors or agents and LOs have? Because if anybody's listening to this or they're circling this issue like, well, I'm going to go out and I'm going to provide clear, trustworthy information. Is there a bit of that where they're just actually piling on as well, right? They're just adding to the problem, even though it's good information, it's extra information. The information already does exist, right? So like, I'm going to go out and start making better TikTok videos, clearer TikTok videos. Is that kind of, are you piling on more to the problem?
I love that question. I don't think you can. I think you have to continue adding information. I think that you can't then your voice is important too. Like people are turning to, you need to be someone that people turn to because they know that you are an educated, guide through this process. But what I think is important is that it's not just information with information, it needs to be relational. I think everything that you put out there, even your video content, it is about people trusting you. And, something we found in our January annual report was that only 20% say that they trust loan officers. And it was, I think, upper 30% trust realtors for making smart decisions about their mortgage or home. And so, how do you build trust in this kind of sea of information? I think that needs to be the primary question. It's you are leading with education, but you're also, sharing your mission for being in this space and what stories about how you have specifically helped buyers or, success stories, things like that people can then see themselves in that position. And I think the education needs to shift from this, from these kind of corporate posts about, no one's reading those, and so one of the data points was from this report was that 72% said they wished financial information was more visual and simplified. And so, how do you do that? I do think you need to continue to educate, but I think it needs to be very much more about you being a leader in a crowded space. You need to partner with other people, interview people, have conversation around these success stories. And I think that's kind of bringing the education to life in a different way.
Right. And that could also, start with the customer that's right in front of you, right? Because pre-COVID or on the tail end of COVID, when the rates rose, rates were low for a long time, and it was much easier for, at least from an LO perspective, perhaps from a realtor perspective as well, to be more transactional than relational, right? And so, if that's not just higher rates, but but technology, AI, the change that is already here, but also coming for the industry is forcing roles that it's at the core, it always was relational, right? But you could get away or you could fudge or you could have quite a few people in the industry that didn't really focus on the relationships. It was tech stack, marketing, and transaction. And now steering back towards a deeper relationship, a service-based relationship with your customers, with your clients. When they trust you, they're going to refer their neighbor or their kid or their niece or nephew to you, right? And so it's not just necessarily about the upfront education. I'm going to put out a homebuyer 101 tutorial or webinar. It's like, no, I'm going to build the trust of the clients in front of me. And once I establish that trust, I'll get more, on the back end from their family and from their friends.
Yeah, it's been pretty fun. My workshops that I've been leading lately, I have been like last week, I was leading workshops on AI, like authenticity in the age of AI. And we would talk about how to automate things and how to use AI in a way that's freeing up your time. But now then you're talking about like what makes you not just competitive in this space, but really helps you create conversion. And it's going to be leaning into that empathy and leaning into the relationships. And it brings up, I'm able to speak from my social work background where you practice reflective listening and, some of these skill sets that we previously would just be like, it's all about speed and convenience and efficiency. And that is important, but now it can be taken care of. And you really need to be leaning into that. Yeah. The relationship side. And if you're not good at that, you need to build those skill sets because AI can replace every other aspect. I mean, in my opinion, there's no question that AI already replaces your knowledge in a lot of ways. I mean, you can still lead with that. You still need to be very knowledgeable, all of that, but you can't say, don't go to AI. You should be saying, go to AI, do that research, validate that information. Let's talk about it. It's just, I think it's absolutely crucial that you are leaning into your humanness as much as possible, your humanity.
Right. Can you unpack a little bit about your social background, your social services background?
Yeah. So I started my career as a social worker, working primarily with homeless youth and recent immigrant communities. And I worked on the health side, but I ended up doing a lot of financial education in that role as well. And then I started training hospital staff and, churches and other like groups, nonprofits on how to better understand those segments. And that's what ultimately, my parents were also in the mortgage industry. So I'd like known that background. But that's what led me into helping on the financial side, understanding different market segments.
Excellent. So I want to go back to the confidence and literacy like dichotomy. They're not obviously, which I found was quite funny. There's a little bit of like well, duh, right? Like, I mean, look at any area of your life and the people in it, and it's like, yeah, generally it makes sense. I know I got a couple of friends that the more confident they are in their knowledge, the less they really know, and then people that think that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know anything, right? So the less informed you feel, really kind of the more you are. So, but that's a parallel that runs all throughout. How does this mismatch for this topic? How does this influence the decisions that people are making in the home buying process? This overconfidence, but actual lack of knowledge, and vice versa.
Yeah. I was laughing a lot at that, the results around that, and seeing like men were predominantly more confident, and that didn't correlate to like women were way less confident and had about the same scores, as men. So I thought that was really interesting. But yeah,
that holds up in about every area of my life. That totally holds up. Yeah,
really funny. Yeah. So I mean, I think that if you, absolutely, it's like right down the middle that you want to see improved confidence scores, but not too confident. And when you're overconfident, I think that you make decisions it could be like thinking you need 10% down, 20% down, and just being like, yeah, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm not buying a home yet because blah, blah, blah. And this is what I know. And so you tend to be, you're a little less open, or you're not validating multiple sources. That was the other thing with with women and the less confident group. We saw people validating more sources to gather information. And I think if you're overconfident, you're not doing that as much.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Holds up.
Yeah.
Especially with the men.
Yeah.
If you had, or if you could design one intervention tool or strategy, right? Because the report emphasizes or discusses the need for early financial education. And if you could design one intervention tool or strategy that the housing industry could support, that could be like, and you talked a little bit about this earlier, like schools or in the workplace or within the community, what would that look like to you?
Well, I'm trying to build it with FirstHome IQ. So we are a nonprofit that I think aligns very well with the business goals and mission goals that we're talking about. So the idea is that we are bringing free financial literacy homebuyer education to high schools, and mortgage and real estate professionals can partner and guest speak in those schools. Many of our ambassadors who are part of that program get deals from teachers and parents as a result of being involved there. But also, I think that education, it's the exact same education that people are using to go into their company offices, doing lunch and learns, working with a corporate benefits type of program. But I do think that partnering, thinking about as if you're an individual, let's say a loan officer or a realtor, and you want to, I think community partnerships are a really amazing strategy right now. It is a very noisy world. And if you can say, where am I connected, or where can I be connected? Maybe it's my local church. Maybe it's a local gym. Maybe it's a nonprofit I work at, or my kid's school, and say, let me offer to do these an education class, or connect them with FirstHome IQ to do a series. But that type of education builds trust. It builds confidence. It improves knowledge by being someone that's showing up in your community, because people listen when they think you're a trusted voice, and so that's why I feel like in this world of overwhelm, of information access, like you need to be leaning into your humanity by going and actually partnering with groups like that. I think that's an area that as an industry, we can come together and really make a dent in the financial literacy crisis by bringing that education to local schools and community organizations.
Do you feel, this would hold true to what's discussed in the report, but if you had only one inlet, it would be high schools first, right? And then businesses secondarily, then the community, or...
I just think that we saw in January that over 80% of our respondents said they didn't receive any education or a small lesson around financial literacy in high school. And so I think that starting there, you're going to be able to remove some of those myths and build confidence, build a healthier relationship with money and homeownership. So many people wait to buy homes just because they didn't think it was something they could ever do, or it didn't register for them because their parents didn't own. So I think that's a real opportunity. I would love to see us go younger than that, and start really early around financial literacy. I would also, I think, from a business perspective, going to, organizations, companies, businesses, that's going to be impactful. Absolutely. But I think high schools is where I feel like there's a lot of opportunity.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So from a lender and a product standpoint, how do you think products should be changed or designed or redesigned based on their communication or their marketing around what they offer to kind of to coincide with consumers' level of literacy?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that we need to simplify everything, and really focus on getting people in the door to have those conversations. I don't think that you're going to be able to get a bunch of people coming to your loan officer by talking about a new product, unless it's talking about it in a really broad sense. I feel like even as we explore shared equity models and things like that, that can really, I do think, open the door to more home buyers. We need to be careful about how we talk about it in a way that is more outcomes focused. It's more, it's very, very simple. And then many people that come in through those channels are also able to may realize they could qualify for a conventional loan because they didn't know about the down payment situation. But I think that's, using stories from home buyers that go through these programs, talking about the, just really basic elements is a good way to start.
So if the industry doesn't change this, if they don't address the literacy gap via better education, better relationships, and things can remain where they are, what, besides the risk of, fewer people getting into homes, what risk do you see for home buyers and the market as well? Beyond, like I said, beyond the obvious of fewer people in homes, fewer people keeping their jobs as originators and agents. What else do you see?
I do think that people are you see this now of people waiting to even explore homeownership until they have been priced out of their market, and or they feel like they've been priced out. And so I think beyond people not getting into homes, I think there's what that extends to is a kind of lack of I don't know if what the word groundedness, and community. I think that what I'm really interested in isn't so much the home ownership piece. I think it's important. I think it, helps people build wealth, all of those things, but it's more about our tagline at First Home IQ is own your future. It's about people feeling like they can make decisions that are good for them. And a lot of times we're just ignoring those things. So it goes beyond just, this is a microcosm of something bigger. But then the other piece that I really care about is the community. The more that when you own, of course, you're investing in your local community. When you don't own, you tend to be less invested and a little bit more mobile. And so I feel like there's in a world, especially where we are feeling more and more isolated due to this overwhelming information and access to everything. We need community, grounded community more than ever. So that's kind of my take on that. But did you have another thought around that?
I do. I'll see that and raise you one, because I 100% agree that if you don't get into a home, or if you when you get into a home, then you're not only you invested in your home, but you're also invested in what your street looks like. And if you're invested in what your street looks like, then you care about what your neighborhood looks like. If you care about what your neighborhood looks like, then you care about how your town as a whole or your city as a whole is functioning. So you're drawn into being a participating member of that community. But what concerns me about the kind of the bleakest possible futures is that, and we're starting to see that now with the rising of the age of the first-time home buyer and the number of people that are not bought in, right? And what you're talking about is very true. So this isolation, this loneliness, but that, and I think that I really do feel like we're seeing it now. That only lasts for so long before that turns to resentment. And I feel like there's this growing a divide that is continuing to grow, where home ownership is kind of the mark between the haves and the have-nots. And from what I've seen, reports on how the younger generations feel about possible home ownership is that it's out of their grasp, right? And so, and not only is it out of their grasp, they're pissed off about it. And so in an already kind of divided country anyways, for over cultural divisions, political divisions, and just you name it, the, like I said earlier, like what has been the core, the central to the American dream and the experience is the home. And the more people that don't feel like that is within their grasp for whatever reason, right? And like you're talking about, a large part of it that actually is, they just don't know any better, is a continual divide between the haves and the have-nots, which is marked by the home. And the kind of like the people that are in homes, you're already like, how to, you got your foot in the door, and then you can use your equity, and then you can step up, or you can keep it as rental property. You're able to play a game that is further and further, or is perceived to be further and further out of reach by the groups of people, the generations that we need to be bought in to the American experience and bought into the American dream the most. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I do think that people are the growing resentment piece. I mean, there have been so many experiences of this like broader betrayal that younger generations feel. And I think with the access to information and transparency through all of that, you see that experienced over and over, even more often than it has actually been personally experienced. And so Gen Z, millennials often talk about feeling like they have been cut out of their future, and so I think that is creating some of the distrust that we see across all industries. And I think that's where, there is an opportunity there to build trust and create that open door. But for a lot of people, the resentment is already there, not just in that they're being cut out, but through a lot of kind of feelings of like believing in something and realizing it isn't true, or that it isn't something they can trust. I mean, from big pharma to technology, and media, healthcare, all across the board. There's just so many things that I think people are becoming aware of that they can't trust anymore, and or they feel they can't trust. And so it's we're in a different dynamic now than we were before access to this kind of information.
That was going to be my final question to you, is that not just the skepticism, but I guess perhaps the resentment or the attitude towards younger prospective homebuyers. How much of that you saw, the not skepticism, but I guess cynicism and perhaps resentment, and also is it because you're all over the country? You do this like this is your thing, right? So is that perhaps also relegated to certain geographic regions throughout the country, right? Like as in, the American South, are they more skeptical of the prospect of homeownership than people in the Northeast?
That's a great question. And I don't know the answer from a data perspective yet, but it's something I want to explore in future reports. But
what about your vibe though? Like just anecdotally, you?
Yeah, anecdote, because I am visiting those places, and I think that people don't feel as cut out in places like my family's in Oklahoma City, and I don't feel like they're feeling as priced out, even in places like that are a bit more rural than in places like Los Angeles, where I am here. I mean, there's a lot of like resentment and feeling that everything is out of reach here. And the turnover and gentrification and all of that is really a big challenge. But that's not seen as much in places like Oklahoma City. So, but I am curious from what the Northeast would look like versus, the Pacific Northwest or something, and I don't know the answer to that at this point.
Yeah, I would venture a guess. Where I live in Southeast Texas, it's about as close to, like fingers crossed for my little slice of the world, but like it's about as close to a recession-proof local economy as possible, because it's all, every man in my family worked at a refinery. Pretty much all of my friends here that are local, they all work in the refinery, or they're a contractor out of the refinery. And those things they're oil and gas refineries that have been rocking and rolling since like the 50s. My grandfather worked in one. My father worked in the same one that my grandfather worked in. And then I've got, one of my best friends, it was the same story. And now he's in that refinery. Right. And so, and to get that kind of job, back in the day, you could just graduate high school, walk down the road, and then that was afforded, just open the gates for you. And then now it's some people, you're not able to get in there right out of high school, but it's like a 2-year degree, right? Like an associate's degree or a certification or something. But if you go, down and you go hour and a half into Houston, you go to Austin, go to Dallas, where, people that have, I remember my first day on campus. I went to school at Texas A&M, and they were credit card companies with their booths set up to sign up 18-year-old kids who had absolutely. We didn't have any financial literacy education, in school, and then people go. Those very same kids are getting loaded up with debt. They're on, they're getting student loans, and they went to go get some, 4-year degree that is not paying off for them. It's like I did exactly what my parents told me to do. I did exactly what society told me to do. And this is not working out for me. So I feel like, like I said, where I live, there's not so much of that resentment, but it was kind of a different, path to adulthood. Then you get out of high school, you get your student loans, you get a 4-year degree for a job that now no longer exists. And so you're working some alternative jobs, or you're piecemealing 3 or 4 jobs together to get into a home that you were supposed to have 10 years ago with the degree that you had 15 years ago. And then that existence isn't there. Right. And so you see that bubble up in, around larger cities and rural communities outside larger cities. So I feel like that the geographic location is going to be really, really important, or a major influencing factor on that skepticism and like resentment towards home ownership.
Yeah, another aspect that I would be curious about would be access to support, and kind of the third place. Like, you see a loss of religious institutions, and decline in attendance in religious institutions across, other areas like the, West and East Coast. But I wonder if added support networks like that are going to play a role in helping people not feel like they have lost everything, and that leads to some of the resentment.
Right. Okay. Look, I could talk to you about this for hours. This is my jam, but we've already gone over the time that we were supposed to have you. So I'll have to get you back on again to talk through more of this stuff. Kristin, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and unpacking this report. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
Thank you so much. Really fun conversation. Appreciate it.